All right, well, I'll get us started. Welcome everybody to this Food System Summit dialogue run by the Good Food Hub. And we're part of a series of dialogues between the coalitions of action that came out of the Food System Summit and small business entrepreneurs around the world that are making food better. So one of the other outcomes of the Food System Summit was we set up this Good Food Hub as a network, a community of those businesses, and we wanted to make sure that the work going on through the coalitions that came out of the summit really thought about and connected with the work of entrepreneurs and small businesses around the world that are so important to food. So we set up a dialogue series to connect the dots, and we've had several so far. This is actually the fifth in the series, and this one is working with the Blue Food Coalition, very important coalition, and is going to ask the question about how to support innovation and entrepreneurship to strengthen fisheries and aquaculture in developing economies. Yeah, I'm Ian Randall. I'm the director of the Good Food Hub, and yeah, we're absolutely thrilled to have you all here today. Just a little bit of call etiquette as we get started. Please feel free to use the comment box if you want to kind of make comments as we get chatting. Otherwise, that's probably the easiest way for you to chip in and ask questions and make comments until we get to the plenary later on. So definitely use that, and I'll keep an eye on it and try and bring people in if there's good points in there. Secondly, keep your mute on. I think we're all good Zoom citizens now, just unless you're speaking. It's lovely if you have your video on. It makes us feel like we're all in the room together. So if you feel comfortable putting your video on, that's fantastic. This call will be recorded, so we'll post it afterwards. So be aware that anything you say will end up in the public realm. And that also means don't share any commercially sensitive information if you're somebody running a business. I need to say thank you to our sponsors, EIT Food, who are supporting us through EU funding. And also thank you to our co-conveners for this call, the Small Scale Fisheries Hub. They're also kind of officially acting as co-conveners, which is fantastic. Now, with all that said, I'm actually going to hand over to Kylie Kelso, who is leading the Secretariat for the Blue Foods Coalition. She's also the Director of Climate Resilient Food Systems at the Environmental Defence Fund. And Kylie, it's been wonderful working with you on this and other things, but please give us a quick welcome and perhaps introduce the work of the coalition and why this space is so important.
Sure, thank you, Ian, and hi everyone. It's so great to see everybody today. We're really excited about this dialogue and hearing from our SME partners. I was just going to provide a little background about why Blue Foods and how the coalition came to be. Over the last handful of years, there's been evidence and a handful of reports and journal articles have really elevated the importance of blue foods. And when I say blue foods, I mean fish, seaweed, shellfish, and algae that have been cultivated or harvested from fresh and marine waters. And they play a vital role. And as evidence has shown, they can help end malnutrition, restore nature, create equitable livelihoods, and improve resilience. We know that they currently play an important role in global food and nutrition security, but especially with climate change, we can continue to elevate the role that they play, especially as other means of food production are impacted by climate. So recognizing this importance, we wanted Blue Foods to have a prominent role at the UN Food System Summit to really show that they can contribute to progressing the SDGs and that they should be recognized as a part of the food system. So the Blue Foods Coalition was launched at the UN Food System Summit, and this was established to help raise the profile of aquatic foods with policy makers and to mobilize resources, both technical and financial support for projects, so countries can advance sustainable and inclusive aquatic food systems. The coalition currently has participation from over 20 member states and is a multi-stakeholder body. So we also have participation from civil society organizations, from fisher organizations, and private sectors. And the secretariat is led by the chair from Iceland, Ambassador Hofstein, who sends his regard. He wishes he was here today. We are really excited for this dialogue today because we recognize the importance of SMEs, small and medium enterprises, in aquaculture and marine fisheries and inland fisheries. There are critical bridges between small-scale producers and markets, and this role is essential to raising the income to fisher folks in developing economies. They're also super important in innovating and scaling solutions that will improve equity, sustainability, resilience, and nutrition. So as we have three SMEs here today who are pioneers, we really want to hear from them as they innovate and scale their solutions. And we recognize that their struggles also provide vital information about the financial and the policy and the cultural reforms needed to ensure that we have wider adoption of blue foods. And this is especially in fisheries, where in other value chains for food production, some of these are more well established. So we want to think about how we could support and how we can help address some of the challenges that they face, especially in small scale fisheries. And that's extremely important because this year is the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. So we really want to ensure that we are hearing from our audiences, hearing from our small scale fishers, and hearing from these important SMEs about the challenges that they face, so we could think about solutions in a future so we can continue to support global blue economies and global coastal communities and the small scale actors that are dependent on this blue food resources. So maybe I'll pause there and hand it back over to Ian.
Thanks so much, Kylie. That's a great setup. So just in terms of the agenda today, we're going to start by just listening and having a conversation with three entrepreneurs that are running small businesses that are working at this kind of interface between fisheries, aquaculture folk and markets. So they're right in the middle there to hear their story about the impact they're having and also to hear about the constraints that they face. So we're going to kind of do that deep dive. Then we're going to come back to Kylie, who's going to share plans for the work of the coalition. So the coalition does, starting to get to work about how they're going to strengthen blue foods around the world. And then we're going to use that to open up the real question, which is, all right, look at these amazing small businesses. Does this coalition work? Actually, how do we work together? Where's the opportunity there? And we'll open it up for the kind of last half an hour for a plenary discussion. But with that said, let's jump in to listen to some actual entrepreneurs who are doing this work. And we've got three fantastic businesses here today. We've got Javier from Smart Fish in Mexico. We've got Praskovia from kind of Resect and Samaki Hub in Kenya. And we've got Serge from Abalobi in South Africa. And yeah, each of you are really making this happen for real, while many of us are, working perhaps at a distance. You're really on the ground working with fisher folk and figuring out how to strengthen the markets and strengthen the kind of outcomes from what's going on there. So let's just open it up, and I'm actually going to ask each of you firstly just to share a little bit about your business and the impact that you have on the kind of livelihoods and sustainability of the folk that you work with. So Javier, maybe you've got an amazing business. Tell us a little bit about it.
Hi, thank you all. And thank you for the introduction, Ian. I'm trying to be short in the presentation. What we try to do in SmartFish is we work with small scale fisheries, and we try to break the cycle of poverty and overexploitation. To do that, what we want is for fishers to earn more fishing less, and to pay them more, we need to have a better product. We need them to deliver a better fish so we can take that fish to better markets. So what we do is that we work with communities fishermen to improve their fishing techniques, the way they handle the fish on the boat, how they kill it and sacrifice it, the way they put it on ice at the beginning. And we also help them improve their processing capabilities, so we can pay them more for the fish and also for processing the fish. So what we are trying to do is to reduce the length of the value chain, bringing more steps into the communities so we can pay for all the steps there. And then in the commercial side, what we do is that we have our own stores in Mexico, and we sell most of the fish through our stores. So we become the only intermediary in that part of the value chain. We also sell to other distributors in the US and hotels and restaurants in Mexico. What we are accomplishing with this new setup is that we can pay fishermen more, and we can have a product in the market that is of competitive price or similar prices to other fishes that are there. We are paying maybe between 30% and sometimes more than 100% to fishermen for the product, for the fish, and we pay also for the processing. And yeah, we have right now 3 stores in Mexico, and we receive funding from Conservation International this year to open more stores, and that's where we are right now.
Wow, fantastic! That's really wonderful. Well, I keep hearing yours. I've heard your story a few times. I'm really fascinated by the idea by just kind of making that supply chain kind of cleaner, shorter, and it's that's allowing you to make sure that the fisher folk capture more value.
Yeah. I mean, in Mexico, there are we estimate almost 12 steps in the value chain between fishermen and the end consumer. So that's a long chain.
Praskovia, your business, you've got both a couple of different businesses, but I can hear, you perhaps there's some things in there a little bit different to your business, but I can see you adding value and making a difference to sort of the sustainability of the supply chains you're working in. Tell us a little bit about that and how your business works there and makes a difference.
Thank you, Ian. So as a woman and youth, I found myself in the aquaculture industry facing several challenges, and there were a lot of barriers even to entry. So I wanted to establish a fish farm to provide affordable protein and also to provide nutrition to the Kenyan population because of the high level of malnutrition in the country. And I was faced with so many challenges, including high cost of production to establish an aquaculture enterprise. So I realized that this is not the case only for myself, but also for other women and youth in the industry. So my quest to find solutions led me to actually co-found another startup called Resect. So at Resect, what we do is we farm insects to provide alternative protein for the aquafeed formulation, because we realize that the cost of feed is usually the highest cost in production, and it can account up to 70%. So we farm these insects and provide them to small-scale fish farmers at a cheaper price as alternative protein to incorporate in their fish feed formulation. When it comes to Samaki Hub, which was my initial company I wanted to establish, at the moment what we do is we offer training and consultancy as we're trying to raise funds to establish their facility on the ground. So meeting the small-scale fish farmers, we realized that most of these farmers, they lack the knowledge and expertise to run the business. So for instance, farm management practices, also financial management, or even record keeping. So these are the things we do through Samaki Hub and Resect to support small-scale farmers. Thank you.
Fantastic. What an amazing story of you finding your way as an entrepreneur to make sure, driven really by a sense of wanting to deliver value in the, people's lives that you connect with, either as consumers or as producers, and ending up with multiple ways you can do that, but always trying to kind of follow that entrepreneurial journey. Fantastic. Serge, you're in South Africa. I think you're operating at quite a big scale now. I understand in a way about bringing some transparency to the supply chains you work in. Tell us a bit about the story of Abelobi, and feel free to correct me if I'm mispronouncing Abelobi.
Yeah, it's Abelobi, but same. Okay. Ian, thanks so much for the invitation. Thanks everyone. It's good to be here. I see some familiar names and familiar faces, so I'm looking forward to the conversation today. I have to say, it's not often that I'm introduced as an entrepreneur running an SME. I see myself as totally an accidental entrepreneur and supporting fisher entrepreneurs. But nevertheless, contextually, I think our story is very similar to what Javier depicted. We start out in South Africa with the realization that, on the one hand, you go to a seafood restaurant in Cape Town, and what you get offered is Norwegian salmon or industrially caught hake or greenlit mussels from New Zealand, while right next door we have small-scale fishing communities that are eking out a livelihood from the ocean, that are catching diversity, but are totally invisible in that market. So I suppose very similar context, but we've approached it maybe a little bit differently, in the sense that over the last couple of years, we have co-designed technology. We've co-designed basic mobile and cloud-based technologies that help the small-scale fishers we work with to do things differently in the way they engage with their operations, with safety at sea, differently in the way they engage with the Fisheries Authority around rights, permits, conversations around quotas, work with conservation organizations, and then very differently in the way they engage with the market. So we now run what we call ECDT technology, electronic cash documentation and traceability technology, and we've appended a marketplace to this. We've appended the digital marketplace to this that allows a whole bunch of fishers that onboard on our program. Sometimes these fishers are not organized and extremely informal. Sometimes they're more organized in associations, in cooperatives, but allows these groups to use their app, their Abelobi app, where they log their catch, their expense, their income, they manage their operations, to push some of that data into a digital supply chain and connect directly with chefs, with maybe home cooks like you and I, with retailers and everything in between. We've been running this for the last 4 years in South Africa, with some lovely ups and downs and really nice successes, but also massive failures. And we've learned a lot over the last couple of years, but we're still around and it's going quite well. And at the same time, we have realized that, hey, maybe there's something in this technology that could be useful to small-scale fishers around the globe. So we are now literally trialing and testing a version or versions of our platform with small-scale fishers in about 10 different countries. And again, learning and making mistakes and figuring it out.
Well, you sound like an entrepreneur, Serge.
Trying.
I mean, in each of your three stories, I can hear the role that you as a sort of a small business, an intermediary in the market, are doing in multiple ways to kind of put extra structure in there that is either improving incomes or sustainability or transparency. You are actually solving the kind of market failures in there in a way that's addressing a lot of the goals that the likes of the UN Food Systems Summit and the Blue Coalition have. You are there doing it actually directly with fisherfolk, often in pretty tough communities. So I think you're a fascinating group to work with, and I imagine we want more companies like yours around the world filling this gap, and you are ideally suited to fill that gap and self-sustain that work because you're doing it in a way that's linked to a business model. But if we want to grow businesses like yours, it's really important for us to listen and understand what your constraints are. What are the things that actually stop you either from expanding your work or expanding the impact you have? Where do you feel that you trip up? I think that's information that I'd love this Blue Food Coalition to hear direct from the voice of entrepreneurs. So I'm just going to go around again, same order as before. Javier, I know, you've got aspirations to keep growing and having a bigger impact. What are the sort of things that unlock that for you?
Well, thanks, and I'm happy to participate, and I'm amazed of what Serge is doing. I need to talk to you more after this conversation. I mean, there are a lot of constraints, I think. One, and we have talked about this before, is financing. When you want to grow, you need money. You need money to open stores. We need money to open stores, but we need money to buy fish. We sell it frozen, so literally when we buy the fish, it's like we froze that capital there. And usually in at least in Mexico, the access to capital is very expensive. When you ask for money to a bank, the best interest rate that you can have is maybe 14% per year. And that's when you are lucky. We have been really lucky on getting financing from other sources like Conservation International and at lower rates, but that's not usually the case for other companies in Mexico. Then obviously we have another constraint, that is the offer of sustainable seafood. We only sell sustainable seafood that is certified or as sustainable or responsibly caught by some certifications, and getting that seafood is not that easy, and unless, because we have to improve the quality of the fish, we have to change the way fishermen are working, right? They were doing things maybe 40 years ago, but they cannot do it the same now, and making that change is not easy for them, and we need to work a lot with them, and that's the job that Smartfish, the NGO part of the company, does, that they work with the fishermen, but that takes time, and right now we are growing, but to get the amount of fish that we need is not that easy. Then we have also constraints. As we grow, we become, I guess, more important to other intermediaries that were doing the bad things. So we are starting to kind of collide with some of them and understand how they work. In Mexico, they work a lot with, it's kind of a slavery situation, because the intermediaries, they offer solutions to fishermen, like they will pay for the gasoline of the boat, for some of the gear, they will give them ice, they will even provide accountable services. And the fisherman thinks this is for free, of course, and of course it's not. And then the same intermediary will buy the food they provide, but he will set the price. So the fishermen are always in debt with the intermediary. That's what we are trying to break, right? That cycle. And we are bringing traceability into the equation with the food that we sell, and transparency. We work with open book policies with the fishermen. But in some cases, it's like they have been mistreated for so long that to establish a confidence, like a relationship of confidence, is hard. So I think some of those are the constraints, and we are also worried about the time, right? We have to move faster, we have to grow faster if we really want to have an impact. And so those are, I think, the constraints. But I think financial would be the easiest one to tackle, to get money on a that is cheaper to grow faster. I think the other ones we can work with them, but financial constraints are some that we cannot overcome that easy from our place.
Thanks, Javier. That's probably a good transition from Proscovia, and I can see John from Pangea Ventures is also curious. I know, John, you're working in West Africa, but you're here curious to hear a sort of similar kind of African story a bit on the cost of capital and how much that's a constraint, and whether that's part of your story too, Praskovia. But maybe start, Praskovia, just, you know, speaking directly from your own experience. What are the things that you have felt have been barriers? And I imagine they're quite different from Javier. He's, you know, in a very different context and a different person. So tell us your story, and then perhaps also, if you get a moment, reflect on some of the way that finance might get to you.
Okay, thank you, Ian. And I would say some of my constraints are similar to Javier's, which is capital or lack of the financial support. So for me, as a youth, it was really difficult to access maybe loans because I would have to provide collateral. And in Kenya, being a woman, it's difficult to own something like land that I could use as collateral for maybe when I'm applying for a loan. So it was a cycle of problems upon problems upon problems. The other thing, when you look at the Kenyan aquaculture industry, you find that it's very, it's not well developed, and you find that there are poor policies and poor policy implementations. So there's very limited support and inclusion for women in the industry. And this is currently what we're trying to fight for. So at the moment, I'm involved in the African Food Fellowship, and we're trying to advocate for the aquaculture policies in Kenya to be sustainable and inclusive, especially for women and youth, because there's a huge challenge there. Women contribute a lot, but they're not recognized, and there's still a lot to be done. Apart from that, I would say another challenge we faced in our startup, especially Resect, when we were trying to upcycle organic waste, because when we farm insects, what we do is we upcycle organic waste and we feed the waste to the insects to provide protein. So when COVID hit, there were challenges in accessing the waste. So that meant that it was difficult to produce. And also there was a unique challenge, because when people realized that we are upcycling waste to provide protein, we would reach out to maybe hotels and restaurants, or maybe market people in the market to collect the waste. And they started selling the waste to us. So you go to collect waste, you tell someone we would like to upcycle this waste, they tell you to pay them. So there's a time we actually did a math, we were calculating like how much it was costing us because it was a pilot project. So we realized that it would cost us $2 to access waste that we would process and get a product that would cost $1. So it didn't really make sense for us. So that is one of the barriers. Like, we're trying to provide a solution, but there are people who find ways to make it not work. In addition to that, there has been a slow development of the upcycling technology. So you find that there's a lot that we are learning along the way as we try to find the better ways, like what combination of organic waste will give us the high quality product, because for the insects, their protein and fat content will depend on the type of organic waste that they consume. And we want to provide like a high quality product to our consumers. So that is one other challenge. In addition to that, we find that consumer awareness and interest, there's lack of that. So when you tell someone that we are farming insects, they're like, really? Like, do people eat insects, or can people eat larvae? But I know people eat insects. So it's very difficult for them to really uptake that and to see it as something viable and something sustainable or nutritious. In addition to that, one thing that I've realized is that so many organizations, they work in silos, and I've always been trying to put myself in situations where I have collaborations and coordinations with different institutions and different organizations to find ways that we could work together. Because I realized that if people work independently, then it's not easy for them to solve a very simple problem. So that's why even at the moment, sorry. That's why even at the moment I'm working in 2 different startups, because it's the challenges are interconnected and interlinked, and we can't really work in silos. There needs to be collaboration, coordination, lots of communication to make the system work. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Praskovia. That was quite a good list. I mean, clearly I've had finance. There's something about policy being wrong and weak. There's your business model still getting developed. There's actually the work to kind of get quality product and the kind of tech innovation there, and the struggle to get that right. There's consumer awareness, and oh, you gave me a last one as well. But anyway, there was a whole string of different things, all of which are fascinating, all of which in a way lay down a challenge for the coalition to think about businesses like yours. Serge, you're in a different stage of development, I think, and in a slightly different market again. Curious where you see as look like you're beginning to take your services into new countries. You're actually expanding beyond into new countries. What are you seeing as your constraints to kind of go into scale with the impact you're having?
Thanks, Ian. Wow, so many different topics. I feel we need to pick one and dive deep into one or two of them. I'd love to circle back on John's comment in the chat around working capital, financial services. I think that's a key topic in our world. But let me try a few things. Yes, patient capital, is absolutely key. There's very little of it. Impact first capital, there's even less of it, even though most VCs out there call themselves impact funds. So, runway with patient capital is extremely hard. I spend most of my day on that, to be totally honest. But I've got two. The one is around scale, and scaling deep versus scaling out. Scaling deep to really find an exit strategy is maybe not the right word, but to evolve the relationship and the partnership on the ground with fisher communities, and see how many more of the services, of the roles in the supply chain can get taken up by ever growing, more confident fisher groups. That's something that we obsess about, that we spend a lot of time about. What are the signals? How do we make sure that it's not just the people catching fish, but it's the people that are doing the quality control, packing the orders, logging the catches, managing the organization. How do we make sure that doesn't remain at that intermediary level, but it really we create opportunities for local social entrepreneurship in fishing communities. So it's not a constraint, but it's something that requires pretty significant attention. The other one is, of course, scaling out. We've taken the approach of scaling out through what one would call replication, but of course, it's never real replication. It's it's a nuanced version of the model. But how do we curate that? How do we find like-minded partners in a fisher organization, in an organization supporting the fishers? How do we again find that match and work closely with one another in an agile collaboration? Work closely with one another of trying to see if there's a similar type of model that can emerge. The one thing I want to pick up on though is something that Praskovia said around consumer awareness and where the consumer's mind is at. On our digital marketplace, you can find catch of the day, real catch of the day. What the fishers have brought in as caught with their low impact fishing methods. It's very seasonal. It changes every day, every week. And there's a lot of weird and wonderful stuff there that people are not accustomed to eat, or have not eaten for a long time, or have forgotten that was even around. And so, there's hype around this. Many people like this idea. Many chefs who can be quite vain like this idea of a lucky packet of beautiful fresh fish and a whole sorts of different things that they can then test their culinary savvy around and create amazing dishes. There's only so many restaurants. There's only so many gastronomic chefs. how do you then kind of start mainstreaming that, where the large majority of consumers are actually quite happy to buy a little portion of filleted salmon that they can put in the microwave or the oven. So really working on rethinking the way we eat seafood and the way we're thinking about seafood. That's a real challenge. There are a lot of people that love our message, that love our story, that will even tell our story, but they'll buy once a month, they'll buy once a month, and all the other days they'll buy tuna and salmon from in an extremely convenient way. So again, rethinking seafood and rethinking the way we engage with our fishing communities and with what they traditionally catch in that basket, that diversity, that's a real challenge. And if I can keep the mic for a few more minutes, with that comes how we understand sustainability. I was listening to Javier earlier, and it's a very interesting model for me, where smart fish, channels, fishing communities that have already taken a step towards sustainability or towards recognizing that their products can be certified as sustainable. It feels like, to be totally honest, it feels like a very different world to me, because many small-scale fishers in South Africa, while they certainly engage in low-impact fishing practices and have local knowledge and have a customary relationship with the ocean, their resources are not doing well. Their resources are overexploited, and they need that opportunity. They need that enabling environment to try this thing. How do you work towards fishery rebuilding? How do you work towards fisheries improvement? How do you even conceptualize sustainability? So long story short, we got a sort of fishers in a particular framework, in a particular mindset, thinking about sustainability in a particular way, and knowing that there's some issues in their fishery they want to work towards and need to make steps with other stakeholders towards. And at the same time, we've got quite a large cohort of consumers that are not going to touch anything that's not green listed or not on an MSC, or doesn't have an MSC tick, for example. So there's definitely that two worlds, and how do we transcend that? How do we make it very clear that we need to work with fishers and give them an opportunity and support them on their journey towards sustainability?
Great question, Serge. That was really good. I think there were some strong points there that I heard that were builds. One was the amount of which we need to build kind of consumer awareness. I think that's an interesting challenge to lay down to the coalition. There's also this piece of, in a way, how we promote sustainable management of fishing, along with obviously the kind of continuing questions about patient capital and policy and the like. Just in a minute, we'll hand over to Kylie to take through the coalition's goals and plans and look for those interfaces. But anybody want to just build? Some of you are entrepreneurs out there. I can see in the list we've got people working with, you've got other entrepreneurs out there. Anybody want to just put their hand up and share where, if they've got an interesting business model that's doing this work and having an impact, or indeed any places that they feel like the stories you've heard are particularly resonant in terms of the challenges faced in playing this role of kind of strengthening these markets for blue foods. Anybody want to just add or build on what's been said? I can see we've got some other fish folks.
Yes.
There you go. Go for it. Oh, you're gonna have to tell me how to pronounce your name.
Okay. I want to share from our experience here in the riverine communities since the impact of climate change on our riverine communities. We've lost so many fish species, and our geolocation is prone to flooding annually. Before the climate change era and whatever, we usually have a flood every year, but sometimes the flood might not be damaging, it might not be devastating to the environment or to the community. But recently, since the past 5 years, we've been having this kind of do I say artificial flooding with the opening of the dam that submerges the whole community and flushes everything away. By the time the flood recedes.
Where are you? Just explain where you are.
Nigeria.
Okay, that's what I guessed.
So we noticed that with the recent perennial and consistent submerging of the communities with the flooding, we found out that we no longer see the usual fish stock that we have. We don't, some species have gone into extinct because before, when we have this kind of flooding that submerges the entire community, it used to happen once in 7 years. So we don't experience any loss of fish stock or aquifers or species or ornamental fishes from our communities. But with this recent change, we found that like this year, as I speak now, we're supposed to be in our fishing festival period, but there's no fish in our rivers. We have so many water bodies littered all over the place, but we can't fish. We can't find anything in the rivers anymore. They've been flushed away. So we really want a solution to this because that's the only source of protein we have in this part of the world. There are no more crayfishes, there are no more shrimps, no more edible frogs, and we can't buy them from the market. So what do we do to have them back in our communities? That's my concern. That's a big challenge to us.
That's a really compelling call out, I have to say. I think it sounds pretty tragic, and it's in the face of climate change, what can we do to, prevent that loss of stock, or stock feels like, anyway, I still need to learn my fisheries terminology, but it seems like a pretty tragic story and a pretty compelling call, again, and great information to put in front of this coalition. John, you wanted to build on something. You want to share?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I just thought I'd touch on this impact investing opportunity, and we know that there's huge. I mean, impact investing is changing all the time. It's very exciting to see the capital moving into impact investing. A lot of attention to agriculture right now, food and agriculture, but not necessarily fisheries. And I've been interested to talk to a number of impact investors that are doing agriculture investments, but they say, no, fisheries, we're not really interested in that. And perhaps, each has their specialty, and that's fine. But it'd be great to talk more about who are the investors in the blue economy, in sustainable fisheries, in artisanal fisheries, because the more I learn about this company, White Pole Fishing Company in Sierra Leone that we're working with, the more I see the huge impact of the fisheries sector, particularly artisanal fisheries, but as it relates to jobs for women and youth, all the jobs are women and youth pretty much. The fisher people are fishermen. They're almost all youth, and the retailers of fish are all in Sierra Leone. They're all 100% women, and the number of jobs and quality jobs that are generated by the sale of local fish that are caught by White Pole Fishing Company is really incredible. It's something like, and we're doing the numbers, but it's something like one job per 25 kilogram carton per week, a huge number of jobs. And so I think building some momentum around this could be very exciting by the actors on this call, if we can draw attention to that and also identify who are the investors. If ag investors are not doing it, who are those that might be interested in the blue economy, and companies like White Pole and Sierra Leone and many others probably on this call.
Thanks, John. That's so actually, I think let's hand over to Kylie. Kylie, I'm really interested to hear now about your plans for the coalition, because I feel like, these companies, all of them have got really amazing stories to tell about how they're helping blue foods, whether that is with people's incomes, with sustainability issues. Very compelling story, but hearing them, I can hear opportunities to kind of address the constraint around capital. Could that be changing the mindset of impact investors or making those more affordable? Support with introducing more sustainable fishing management. There's all sorts of work perhaps through maybe with the national pathways on policy reforms. There's consumer campaigns and raising consumer awareness about their choices and how they're buying and cooking their blue foods. There's support about innovating new products and getting better quality there. There's all sorts of places I can hear the potential for support to these businesses, but it'd be great to hear. Coalition, you're still probably in a bit of a formative stage. What's emerging there and how might that connect?
Thank you, Ian, and thank you to all of our panelists. The stories are very compelling and inspiring for the amazing work that you're doing on the ground. So I just want to say thank you. But I think it really highlights the issue that we've been having for years in this space. Fish have not been seen as food, and the connections to the food community and how people are investing and thinking about opportunities, especially because of the impacts of climate change. Fish haven't been, blue foods have not been part of that dialogue. So that's really where we see the role of the coalition. We aim to engage governments, civil society, and interested parties to promote the understanding and integration of blue and aquatic foods into food system conversations and value change. And this includes not just thinking about them, but including them in decision-making for policy, for funding at all levels. So going from the regional to the national to the international and global level, making sure that blue foods have a seat at the table where they haven't been. We have two main goals, and as Ian mentioned, we are still in the formation part, but we do have two clear goals that we're looking to achieve. We want to harness opportunity at upcoming events to continue raising the profile of aquatic and blue foods in the discussion of food systems and in the discussion of climate change impacting food systems. So we are looking to have side events and activities and have a presence at upcoming events such as the CBD, the COP for the UNFCCC, the Committee on World Food Security. So we can continue bringing to audiences the relevance of aquatic foods, especially in progressing the SDGs. Typically, they're seen only as contributing and progressing SDG 14, life below water. But when you look at the indicators and you think about the role of blue foods, as we mentioned, the role with supporting livelihoods with women in Sierra Leone, we heard that almost all of the fishery workers are women. So that says that fisheries and blue foods are contributing to a whole host of SDGs. And this is not really known, and this is not connected to the priorities of some government officials, such as health ministers, development ministers, and finance ministers. So we're going to continue bringing that message to them. A couple of upcoming activities is at our Oceans Conference in Palau in a couple of weeks. We're hosting a side event called Blue Foods, Crucial Component to Climate Resilient Blue Economy and Global Communities. And this is gonna have an emphasis on how we could bring blue foods into decision-making arenas for oceans, coastal, and inland aquatic resources. And we're gonna have an emphasis on the Pacific region because it's being held there, and also because blue foods are really the heart of the food system in that region. And then we're looking towards the UN Oceans Conference. We're collaborating with a number of international actors to organize an event to mobilize commitments for blue foods and to recognize the role and importance of small-scale fisheries for providing food security, nutrition, and coastal resilience, and securing their coastal stewardship of blue resources, especially in the year of IAFA, which is extremely important in elevating and sharing and showcasing these stories. And we're not done. There's a whole host. I have a long list, but another event that I do want to highlight is the COP. COP27 Oceans over the last few years has had a stronger and more of a presence on thinking about climate change and the COP and the role that the oceans plays. And we want to think, have blue foods a part of that. We want to think about how nature positive fisheries and aquatic food production can help countries with their attainment of the nationally determined contribution. So starting again, bringing the importance of blue foods to these conversations where they are critical, they're vital, but they've been absent. We also want to mobilize support, including investment, technical capacity and partnerships for countries that are setting out to integrate aquatic and blue foods into their food systems. And that includes working with our members, especially member states, to help potentially leverage their bilateral aid programs and their membership and participation in overseas development programs and ongoing collaborations to have them continue to support blue foods, and to say to these memberships, such as looking at the GEF, the Global Environment Facilities New Replenishment, or the High Level Panel on Ocean Action, the FAO Blue Transformation, being a voice at those venues to say that we need to think about how we can invest to support reforms and policy, to support SMEs, to think about what is the important infrastructure and support system to help advance blue foods, because we're going to need them as we think about the impacts of climate change. So these are two big pathways. Again, we are still in formation, but this is building towards realizing the full and diversity and potential of aquatic and blue foods to help ending malnutrition and build nature positive, equitable, and resilient food systems, and progress the SDGs. So we have lots of work to do. And then before I hand it over, I will mention that the coalition is not a closed membership. It is open. We do have bi-weekly working group meetings where we share stories similar today, share stories and missions of people around the world, communities, and initiatives around the world that are helping to advance blue foods. So please, I will share my email. Let me know, because it'd be great to have a larger representation and have more participants.
Thanks, Kylie. I'm going to use my privilege here, just ask you a kind of clarifying question. One of the things I've heard a lot with these the coalitions at the moment, they've been born out of this global process, and they sit up very high up in the air. And when I talking to the stories of entrepreneurs and small businesses who are really close to the ground, it feels like such a gulf. And when I hear your goals, they sound great, but I'm curious, like, can you give me a kind of specific example of something you would hope that changes somewhere specific, that because of your work of kind of influencing and advocacy, or because of your work to change maybe some of the coalition member kind of states, like, is there something you can share that you could imagine being felt by some of these SMEs? You know, is there a policy that will change in Kenya that will help Proscovia? Is there a new impact investment fund that Surge might be able to access? Where would you see your work bridging across into something that will be felt support?
Sure. So I see a couple avenues. I think, for example, when we talk to investors in impact funds, as John mentioned earlier, they're not thinking about fisheries. So I think the coalition could bring that perspective and bring policymakers that are having changes on the ground, that are transforming the policies on the ground, bringing these stories and making the connections, and making connections on, hi, you want to work on this in your region. Look at what they're doing look at what Proscovia is doing in Kenya with her alternative source for fish meal, which right now in many places that's coming from fisheries that other people are depending on for food. So how can you think about these alternatives? How can you make that connection? And I also, we're working, as you mentioned, with other coalitions that have existing projects on the ground. So one of the pieces that we're collaborating with is the School Meals Coalition. So how can we pair school meals who have existing programs on the ground? How can we bring blue foods into that? How can we bring, you know, the local fishers and the initiatives where school foods already have that program to ensure that we're incorporating it? So there's a few different venues, and some are still in development as well too. So I will admit that.
Thanks, Kylie. Well, let's open up the discussion to everybody. I think, you know, the sort of the question of this whole dialogue is really, how might the Blue Food Coalition support innovation entrepreneurship to strengthen fisheries and aquaculture in developing economies? And I'm going to kick off actually and ask both Serge and Proscovia to make a kind of initial reaction on behalf of entrepreneurs. It would be great also that I know that the Small Scale Fisheries Hub is here. I think Janaya Bruce is somewhere on the line. It'd be great. Also, there's Coco, maybe you can add another perspective. There you are, Janaya. On behalf of kind of the coalition in there, and then we'll open it up to everybody else. Serge, you've got your hand up, so it'd be wonderful to have you kick off with the first kind of reaction to hearing that. And, where do you see the ways, if you listen to that, to really make sure we're connecting the dots here between this very kind of this high level coalition and their work and really beginning to support the role of small businesses are playing in strengthening these markets?
Thanks, Ian. Let me try. I'm going to come in two layers. The one is, obviously there's a lot of talk about the blue economy. There's massive hype about the blue economy. There's ministerial events, there's conferences left, right, and center. I can't even keep up anymore. Everybody's talking about the blue economy, and it certainly has been hijacked by a whole bunch of other sectors and not the small scale sector. So I think that's the starting point. How do we work together? I know that work is being done, but how do we amplify that work and really highlight that if we're going to talk about the blue economy, we need to talk about small scale fisheries, and we need to really understand small scale fisheries. We need to make sure small scale fishers are at the table. That's the first one. The other one is when it comes to impact investment, John. We've definitely put ourselves out there, and we the number of pitches and the number of pitch decks that we've sent around, it's been insane. But there are so many impact investors. They're looking for the next big thing. They're looking for the next big thing in aquaculture technology. They're looking for the next big thing in meat-free or fish-free foods. They're not looking to invest in the basics, in what I call the basics, in the foundational work that needs to happen. Let's face it, smart fish needs more shops. It's that simple. They need more shops so they can channel more supply through the system. Sure, there's a whole bunch of other things they need, but they need more shops. Proservia, she needs more runway so she can get her feed into the market and start experimenting. It's not rocket science, but that's what needs to happen. And it's the same with Abelobi. We need runway to onboard more fishers. And keep going. And so I think, my point is that, there are a lot of people that have stopped thinking about fisheries, that are looking at, fisheries, and they've all watched Seaspiracy, and they've moved on for fisheries. And I think we've got a job to do to kind of bring that back and say, hey, if we're gonna save our oceans, if we're gonna save, and we're gonna or dive into climate change, adaptation or mitigation or resilience, we need to dive into our fisheries. We need to dive with a whole bunch of different stakeholders, with a lot of different expertise. We need to dive into the fisheries, doing work that some of us were doing 20 years ago already, but we need to do it at scale.
Thanks, that's really compelling. Cecilia, I can see you've got a hand up. I'm assuming that's a kind of build. So maybe before I hand over to Praskovia, do you want to just come in and make a quick build on what Serge was saying?
Yes, I wanted to second what Serge is saying. And I also, around all this hype where investors are looking for the next big thing, for the next sustainable seaweed farm, or the next mussel farm, there are many issues around small scale fisheries that have not been addressed and that are still pending. Things like access rights. Serge mentioned this. There's so many issues around small scale fisheries that I feel are being brushed under the carpet just because they're hard, and they haven't been addressed. And now this whole blue foods movement is kind of brushing that under the table and looking for the next big investment without really addressing a lot of the issues facing small scale fisheries. And I think these need to be on the table.
Thank you, Cecilia. Praskovia, you're in a different place on your journey, but listening to the work of the coalition, I'm really curious to hear your reaction to that and how you imagine it might connect to your work, and any challenges you might lay down before the coalition to make sure they're maximizing their impact.
Thank you. I'd first like to react to John's question about from Pangaea Ventures about investment in aquaculture in Kenya. So I'd say at the moment, what happens is because the aquaculture industry is a young industry in Kenya, you find that the value chain is broken. So for instance, if you want to venture into fish farming, you have to start from where do I get my inputs? The road network is not that good, and also market linkages are not so good. So you have to figure out all these things along the value chain. So what happens if you have the money and the capacity, you come and establish. At the moment, the big companies, some of them have been able to get investment. But what happens to the small scale farmers is you don't have something to show that, okay, this is what I want to do and I need money for this. So most of the investment, which is not that much, goes to the big companies, which are very few. And the small scale farmers are still left in the cycle of production consumption. So they try to produce, they don't have enough money to buy even quality feeds. Some of them process their own feeds on farm, meaning they're getting poor quality product or even not getting returns. Or if they are able to get a quality product, they can't really compete in the market with the large scale producers because they have to sell expensive. They spent a lot of money in their production. So it's a circular system. It just goes round and round. So I'm really happy about the talks that are ongoing about the blue economy. And I'd like to see more women involved and also considered and trying to be empowered because, you know, women, when you look at women, they are the bearers of the men and women who are going to lead the future. So if a woman is not well taken care of, it's going to reflect in the society because they're going to give birth to children. And if these children are not healthy or they're experiencing problems, they're going to be the leaders of tomorrow. So we really have to consider, like, what can we do to help the women? They're already contributing a lot. How can we make it sustainable for them? So yeah, that's, I think, what I would like to add on that.
Thanks, it's a really great challenge. I can see Kylie and Lena, you've both got your hands up. Should I go, do you want to build on to the conversation before I go to Janaya? So maybe Kylie, how about you? Do you want to?
Sure, I'll be brief. I just wanted to recognize the important points that Cecilia brought around tenure. And I think a key piece that the coalition is supportive in and thinking about how can we bring this conversation and keep pounding the drumbeat is around the voluntary guidelines for small scale fisheries, which is endorsing and has been endorsed. It's adopted by consensus already, but the challenge is the implementation of it, and that we really need to call for timely implementation of the small scale fishery guidelines because those are important, and that really could help help support the communities that are providing that are dependent and that are providing blue foods.
Thank you. And Lena?
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you for this discussion. Just to briefly introduce myself, I'm working since recently in the Food Systems Coordination Hub, and I am the engagement coordinator responsible for working with the coalitions and also with stakeholder engagement group that we will set up. And I have 2 points that I want to make. The first one, with regard to also the comment that Jessica Landman made in the chat, is that it's really important to use policy measures to change the situation. I can just think, like someone mentioned, oh, we could work with the School Meals Coalition to get fish and aquaculture products into school canteens. I mean, if that is done on a policy level, like Brazil, for example, has a law, by law, the school system needs to spend 30% of its budget for the school meals through local food chains, produced food by local food producers. I mean, this, of course, can imply the local fisheries, and that's by law they have to do it. So that kind of can bring a substantial shift in the food system towards using these small scale producers. So policy change is really important, and I think also there the coalition on blue food can really help in showcasing examples to convince the politicians in countries to ensure that this is thought about. Because again, at countries, there's ministries of fisheries, and then there's a ministry of agriculture, and there's a ministry of health and a ministry of environment. They don't all kind of think about each other when making decisions. And the second point is that, I mean, looking at all these different coalitions, I mean, it's really important that the hub helps in making the connections between the different coalitions, because, I mean, the issues that you are talking about, I mean, I hear, sorry for the name, from Kenya. Yeah. I hear her say, oh, we need more women and youth. I mean, there is a coalition on making food systems work for women and youth and girls. I mean, food systems, fisheries is part of the food system. So there, I can see a connection already with that coalition. The other one, I mean, I really hear the issue of investment and financing. And I mean, yesterday I talked with the representatives of the True Value of Food Initiative Coalition. I mean, ensuring that what the fishermen and women are producing, that they get this fair price. They are working, I mean, they have the Rabobank in their group, Fair Trade International, to just assess risks. I heard people talking about, oh, it's risky to invest. So that's another coalition that I think the Blue Food can work in. And there's so many more. Decent work. Fishermen also need to have decent work and have access to rights. Again, another one. So we hope to produce very soon a list with contact point information of all the different coalitions, so that you can reach out and make these connections to mainstream, that people will think about fisheries when they discuss healthy diet or when they discuss school meals in the different coalitions. So these are my 2 points, the policy work and the connections. Thanks.
Thanks, Alina. And I think what's wonderful is about all the small businesses is, while the coalitions have had to sort of separate out almost artificially the different issues, actually small businesses feel them all every day. You know, it's not the issue of decent work and blue foods and women and true value of food. They are all felt every day by small businesses because they're actually all connected. I think there's something powerful about that. Janaya, we were going to make sure that the Small Scale Fisheries Hub has your co-conveners here, that you had a chance to also kind of build and react on some of the conversations. So let me invite that in, and then Colette, we'll come back to you.
Thanks, Ian, and thank you to the Good Food Hub for providing us with the opportunity to co-convene this dialogue with the coalition. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the SSF Hub, or the Small Scale Fisheries Resource and Collaboration Hub, we're a newly launched interactive online space that provides open source tools to strengthen small scale fisheries governance and community development, with our main purpose being creating one space where our users can access freely available tools and resources, while also sharing their stories, information, ideas, and participating in events like webinars and like this dialogue that we're having today. So in thinking about how can the coalition support small scale fishers and fishing communities and SMEs, we really think that the coalition, the high level power that this coalition has, can be used to elevate some of these messages and needs that have been identified in this dialogue, including the high costs of nutrition, financing and access to capital, inclusion of women, development of technology and resources for that, as well as consumer awareness. And the coalition could kind of help clear this pathway for innovation and entrepreneurship by smallholders, SMEs, small-scale fishers, and elevate these needs that are being addressed. And importantly, doing this in a way that ensures the needs of small-scale fishing communities are heard and integrated into the processes to drive innovation in an inclusive and very equitable manner. So part of the main goal of the hub is to connect small-scale fishers and small-scale fishing communities with each other to share resources and stories. And we think that the coalition could also support this as well by connecting small-scale fishing communities with each other and with decision-making bodies and processes, and providing opportunities for innovation by sharing knowledge between communities that are facing similar challenges, and that this would be essential to driving innovation. And then also the resources that the SSF Hub hosts are a big part of learning and providing support for education and technology literacy training to drive innovation in some of these small-scale fishing communities. So we're really grateful to be co-conveners, and I think that a lot of the issues that are being addressed during this call are incredibly important and incredibly important for communities and for fishers. And we really appreciate you all speaking on behalf of your businesses and your organizations. Thank you.
Thanks, Janaya. That's great. Colette.
Yeah, I wanted to just ask a broad question, I suppose, is that oftentimes when one disrupts, excuse me, when one disrupts value chains, you tend to sidelight intermediaries, and that's done with good intentions to improve the traceability, transparency, and the price paid to fishers, for instance. But I wonder what happens to those intermediaries, because a lot of times, for instance, they involve women and they involve vulnerable groups, or they involve other members of the sort of small scale communities that really depend on these roles to feed themselves and to support their families. And so, as I said, I think it's got done with good intentions, but I just wonder, in developing a business, how they're included, or whether their sort of progress is tracked ultimately when driving for socially responsible seafood and for sustainability in the production of that seafood.
Okay, Colette, I think that's a Javier, certainly Javier, you're in the middle of that puzzle. And I think, in a way, it's a classic development of a value chain puzzle of as you seek to actually kind of simplify a value chain and make it more efficient, there are a set of people that get locked out from that, or it changes the structure and where people are getting value. It does drive change in a way that there are winners and losers. Javier, curious to hear your experience of that.
Yeah, I think what I said at the beginning is that we're trying to, for example, we're trying to move some of the steps of the value chain into the communities. So bring the value chain into the producers. So maybe an intermediary that is working now will lose their jobs, but you are creating jobs in the communities. And what we see, for example, is that with fishermen co-ops, usually what happens is that there are fishermen co-ops, not fisherwomen co-ops. So usually women doesn't have an opportunity to work or to receive part of the wealth of that co-op because there simply are women. So when you create jobs for example, for processing in the communities, most of those jobs are taken up by women in the communities that now have access to a job, to a well-paid job that they didn't have before. For example, in the communities that we're working, we estimated that in the last 3 years, we created around 60 job positions that were taken by women in the communities, and there were not before there. So of course you are going to alter the chain, and in some there are going to be some losers, but what you want to have is winners in the communities, I think, because what you need to do is bring more money into the beginning of the producing of the cycle. Because if you don't pay, I think one of the worst things that we can do for the environment is not pay the producers what their work is what their work values, right? The value of their job. Because if we pay them enough, they are going to take care of the environment because they want to take care of the environment, but we are not paying them enough. And one of the ways of doing that is bringing more jobs and steps of the value chain there.
Thanks, Javier. Just a little build from me that I've heard in other conversations, it seems like a fascinating innovation is actually also how you start to pay producers to also be stewards of our environment and that they get paid for the ecosystem services they provide in stewarding that natural capital. So that begins to get valued at the starting point rather than otherwise, if it's not valued, it continues to get degraded. It's almost that natural capital piece, but intermediaries like you in some places are beginning to find ways to actually measure the positive impact on the environment and then be the kind of aggregator of that natural capital that's being created so that you can tap into carbon markets or ecosystem services markets and get that money down to the small scale producers. I think it's quite an interesting innovation in a world that needs to figure out how to be nature positive in the way we do production. Serge, you've got your hand up. Curious to hear your also in this space.
Thanks. I also wanted to reply to Colette. This is obviously an extremely pertinent point. Our model is very similar to Smart Fish model. While there's an element of disruption, it's actually all about value retention. It's about how do we maximize on the opportunity in the local community to benefit from the product. And so, of course, we run a digital marketplace. So when you run a digital marketplace, there is certainly a danger of leaving out a whole bunch of people that have roles in the post-harvest setup. And so the way we've approached this is that this is not an Uber type marketplace or an Amazon or anything like that. This is a platform co-op. Our environment, our platform, or our marketplace, you can only onboard, through a collective action process. You can't be an individual fisherman and then, sign up and load your catch and start transacting. That would just mimic and potentially even reinforce some social injustices and some real issues on the ground already. So again, the idea is that the technology is not implemented, in a kind of the typical way we think about digital marketplaces, but that the technology is implemented, and we've almost hard-coded this into the platform, but that it's implemented, within this notion of value retention of collective action on the ground. Yeah.
Thanks, Serge. Feels like we're getting down into the specifics here. And actually, for me, that's actually really refreshing. I think as we head towards closing up this call, and I'm going to invite closing remarks in a minute, both from kind of Javier to think about, to show what you as an SME entrepreneur in this space, what your hopes are, but also Kylie, you've been listening here, what have you heard? Like I do still hear a gulf between what's going on at this kind of high level advocacy level and the very felt acute needs and potential of the SMEs. And I wish there was a way that in a way we could almost like throw out challenges from communities. So, the challenge here of having the water in Nigeria, the rivers getting flooding, kind of the dams getting released and flooded out, that's damaging the fish stocks. Could you actually work with that community where we've had that hand thrown up to change policy about dam releases and the scheduling of those in a way that's good for fisheries? Can you actually get to the point of responding to the direct needs here, or a different kind of impact investment fund that's working with fisheries? How can we get to that point, and almost in that prove the point that we can make change happen, and tighten up some of the advocacy agenda that, as I hear, it still sounds very broad. We're sort of, so it's like, it'd be lovely to get to those concrete cases. So Javier, let me hand over to you and then back to Kylie for some closing remarks. Javier, what are your hopes for the future here?
This is always hard. And I think we talked about this before in another dialogue we had. And I remember that I ended up saying that we need to put money in the service of the planet, right? And not the planet in the service of money. And I think it's the same here. We need to have cheaper money to improve and scale faster. And I think that's always one hope that I always have, that is going to change, that investors are going to understand and governments are going to understand that the risk of losing the planet is higher than the risk of losing some money when you lend it to people. I think we have oceans and rivers of hope and opportunity to change the road. We need to make the ocean more present in the minds of governments and investors, and we need to focus on working sustainable in the oceans and in the farmers and everything that we do. And I think the way of making the changes we need to do is working with the fishermen communities, working with the intermediaries, working with the people that is producing the food that we eat. And we need to pay them the real value for the products. I think that would be my closing words.
Thank you, Javier. Kylie?
I first just want to say thank you to everybody, because I think the platform, like what the Good Food Hub provided today, and bringing us all together to share these stories is the first step. We really need more people to hear these stories. We need policymakers, we need funders to really internalize what the challenges are in the ground, and again, how these challenges are going to be exacerbated by climate change. The coalition is a group of countries and partners in civil society trying to figure out how to transform the world's food systems, including their own. In many cases, there's friends of fish within governments working to change their governments from within and to better recognize the importance of food. So we really need to tackle this at every level. We need to tackle it in school meals and marine spatial planning and funding. And it's not an easy, quick task. And I think that this is going to take time, but steps like these, conversations like these, having more networks integrated and making these linkages between historical food system conversations and actors from the blue economy world. This is the first step. It's not going to change overnight, but I think that this is really how we're going to catalyze change. This is how we're going to get more acknowledgement of the people working on the ground, the entrepreneurs, the fishers, and get these resources to them by bringing it to light. And I think the coalition's still figuring out like what's the maximum impact that we can make. And I encourage people to join our coalition meetings, join the coalition. So this is continually heard, because that's how we're going to make a difference. And we need pressure from all different angles on governments, on policymakers, and on funders to make that possible. And thank you for having me and the coalition represented today.
Thanks, Kylie. Just one very practical question. If people do want to stay involved, what's our channel? Maybe that's a question to Alice or Kylie about how we get that invite to people. They need to email you, Kylie, is that right?
Yes, and then I will put you all on the listserv, and please email me with any other questions as well. Okay, so we'll try and get that out to folks. Well, thank you all. I mean, yeah, so in terms of this call, I just want to say thank you to all for the work you are all doing at different levels. It feels like a really important agenda. I've been learning myself a lot about blue foods recently and feel pretty compelled about the role it plays in the world and its scope for really being managed much better for both kind of people and planet. And yeah, the other thing I want to say is just, this is our last coalition. I want to say thank you to Alice, who I get to be up here on stage and get to feel some of the kind of glory of turning up and facilitating these calls. But the real work is done by Alice behind the scenes, who's lining everybody up. And she makes enormous difference to me. She's incredibly efficient. And I can't tell you how grateful I am as we close out this call to her.
Thank you.
And thank you for that. And just Javier actually asked a great question in the chat. He asked, how can we be in touch with the people that participated today? If you don't mind answering that real quick as well.
Well, on the Good Food Hub, you can find each other actually, as long as you're all registered there, just look up the name and send each other a message. So that is what the Good Food is designed for. It's a great big social network for those of us trying to make food better. So please, make the note of the name and you can find each other there. And if any of you are not registered on the Good Food Hub, please do register and make it a lively community. Yeah, we're about to go through a transition. We're just falling off the end of this contract. We need to figure out how we sustain it, but we'll keep it going. It works a little bit like Facebook, so as long as we all keep using it, it'll keep alive on its own to some extent. But yeah, hopefully we'll find some new work to do that keeps it really like a working space for everybody working on food systems change through small businesses. Yeah, anyway, so thank you for this call. Thank you for your work on Blue Foods. Please stay involved. Let's keep it up. Thank you for all that you do. Okay. Bye-bye.